4 lives taken in cold blood. 2 children, their parents, and even the family dogs, all executed in their own home. But the person who orchestrated it, she never pulled the trigger. She only had to plant an idea. This is the story of a crime so unimaginable, so carefully concealed beneath a veil of manipulation, that it sent shockwaves through a quiet suburban neighborhood in Romeoville, Illinois. A home that was supposed to be a place of safety, of love, became a crime scene soaked in tragedy. But what if the truth wasn't as simple as a moment of rage? What if the true killer wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, but the one who whispered into a vulnerable ear, filling it with lies, planting seeds of fear, and turning a life upside down? Nathaniel Huey Jr., a man whose life seemed to have been falling apart, found himself tangled in a web of manipulation so intricate that it led him down a dark path from which there was no return. And at the center of it all was a woman named Ermalinda Palomo, who spun a story of betrayal and revenge so convincing, so twisted, that Huey was left with little choice but to believe it. She told him his fiancée, Zoraida Bartolome, was hiding secrets, secrets that could destroy everything they had. She convinced him that Zoraida wasn't just the woman he loved, but someone who had betrayed him, someone who would bring him down. But was any of it true? Was Zoraida really the threat she was painted to be? Or was the truth far darker, hidden behind a manipulator's lies? As the lies spiraled, so too did the violence, culminating in a night that would end in bloodshed, a night that no one could have predicted. 4 lives would be stolen, but the full story of why would only come to light after a high-speed chase, a crash, and a final confrontation that would leave everyone asking the same question. Who was really responsible for this senseless killing? How does a seemingly ordinary couple become entangled in a twisted web of manipulation, betrayal, and murder? And how did it all unravel in a high-speed chase that ended in gunfire? The truth behind this massacre isn't as simple as a lover's quarrel. It's a story of control, deception, and the fragile boundaries between trust and treachery. Stick with us as we unravel the chilling details of how a tragic act of violence was set into motion by a master manipulator and a vulnerable man who couldn't see the truth until it was too late. A story that will haunt you long after you've heard it. Stay with us as we walk through every layer of this devastating tragedy. Before we get into the chilling details of this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to True Crime for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. They were an ordinary family, a mother and father working hard to provide a stable life for their 2 children, a home filled with love, laughter, and the kind of dreams that come with building a future in a quiet suburban neighborhood. But in a single night, all of it, every plan, every hope, was wiped away. Alberto Rolón and Zoraida Bartolome were by all accounts devoted parents. Their story was one of perseverance, both coming from hard-working Puerto Rican backgrounds where family was the center of everything. They were no strangers to struggle, but they never allowed it to define them. Alberto was quiet, reserved, and deeply devoted to his family. He worked long hours to provide, often sacrificing his own comfort to ensure his children had a better future. Friends described him as the kind of man who didn't talk much, but whose actions spoke volumes. He was reliable, thoughtful, and fiercely protective of his loved ones. Zoraida, on the other hand, was the heart of their home. Vibrant and full of life, she balanced work and motherhood with ease. Those who knew her say she had an infectious warmth. She made people feel seen and valued. At work, she was known for her strong work ethic, but at home, she was a mother first. Together, they had built a life filled with promise, a future that revolved around the 2 people they loved the most, their sons. Adriel and Diego, just names to most of us, but to those who knew them, they were so much more. Adriel, the eldest, was just starting to come into his own. He was a bright, curious child, full of questions about the world. Teachers remember him as an eager student, someone who loved school, who made friends easily, who had a kindness about him that was rare for someone so young. Diego, the youngest, was his brother's shadow. He idolized Adriel, following him wherever he went, mimicking his every move. He was the mischievous one, always looking for ways to make people laugh. His teachers recall his infectious smile, the way he could light up a room just by walking in. They were inseparable, two young boys with their whole lives ahead of them. But that life was stolen before they even had a chance to live it. For those who knew them, the days leading up to the murders seemed normal, almost eerily so. The Roland Bartolome family wasn't in distress. There were no public fights, no signs of impending danger. Home security footage from their quiet neighborhood shows nothing unusual. A family going about their routine, the boys playing outside, Zoraida checking the mail, Alberto arriving home from work, exhausted but smiling as he walked through the door. But behind closed doors, something was shifting. Neighbors would later recall small, seemingly insignificant moments, things that, in hindsight, should have raised red flags. A shift in demeanor, a tension in Zoraida's expression, a hurried look in Alberto's eyes when he thought no one was watching. Were these signs of fear? Had they sensed something was wrong? Or were they just coincidences, pieces of a puzzle that would only make sense after the unimaginable had already happened? In the days leading up to their deaths, there were whispers of unease. A co-worker of Zoraida's would later say that she had been distracted, more so than usual, her mind elsewhere. At one point, she had even mentioned something about feeling watched, but she brushed it off. A neighbor reported seeing a dark vehicle idling near the family's home one evening. The driver never got out, never approached the house. They just sat there watching. And then there were the phone calls. Family members said that Zoraida had received a strange call a few nights before the murders. She didn't say much about it, only that it had made her uneasy. But what did she know? Had she begun to piece together the truth? And if she had, did she ever realize how much danger they were in? This was a family that should still be here today. A mother, a father, and two young children who should have had years, decades of memories ahead of them. Instead, they became victims of a plan so calculated, so heartless, that it still doesn't seem real. But what led to this? What set this tragedy into motion? To understand that, we have to go back. Back to the people who orchestrated it all. Because the truth is, this wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. This was murder. It wasn't just one person who caused the deaths of an innocent family. It was a partnership, a deadly, toxic bond fueled by obsession, manipulation, and a thirst for control. Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo weren't just a couple. They were a force of destruction, two people who, together, became something much darker than they ever could have been alone. But who were they before the murders? And how did their twisted connection lead to the execution of an entire family? To answer that, we have to start at the beginning. Nathaniel Huey Jr. wasn't an evil mastermind. He wasn't the kind of man people would immediately suspect of mass murder. But underneath the surface, there were cracks, warning signs that, in hindsight, pointed to something deeply disturbed. His early life is difficult to trace, mostly because he wasn't the type of person who made lasting connections. Those who knew him say he kept to himself. He was secretive, paranoid, and as he got older, those traits only became more extreme. Huey Jr. had ambitions, big ones. He wanted success, money, power, but life never seemed to work out in his favor. He tried his hand at various jobs, never holding one for long. A security guard, a truck driver, a self-proclaimed businessman. Each endeavor ended the same way: failure, frustration, and eventually bitterness. Friends, what few he had, would later recall moments of unpredictability. One day he was quiet, withdrawn. The next he was aggressive, confrontational. And then there were the outbursts. Huey had a history of anger issues, something that showed up in his criminal record. Though the details are sparse, there were reports of domestic disturbances, threats of violence, and erratic behavior that made those around him uneasy. But no one ever imagined it would escalate to this. So how does a man like Huey Jr., a failed businessman with a short temper, become a killer? The answer lies in the person standing beside him. The woman who didn't just enable his darkest impulses, she guided them. Not much was known about Ermalinda Palomo before she met Nathaniel Huey Jr. She lived an ordinary life, at least on the surface. She had a job, relationships, responsibilities. But there was something beneath that facade, something darker. Palomo was not a woman who liked to be crossed. She was calculating, obsessive, and, above all, manipulative. Former acquaintances would later describe her as someone who always needed control. She didn't argue, she dictated. She didn't debate, she convinced. And once she had someone under her influence, she never let go. Experts in criminal psychology describe people like Palomo as classic narcissists. They seek power in relationships, thrive on manipulation, and carefully construct their own version of reality, one where they are always the victim and everyone else is to blame. And in Huey Jr., she found the perfect subject, a man desperate for direction, someone easily controlled, easily angered, and willing to do whatever she asked of him. Once she had him, it wasn't long before she started planting ideas. Small at first, innocent, but over time, those ideas became something else entirely. And then the paranoia began. The relationship between Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo was anything but healthy. It was built on obsession, fear, and a shared belief that the world was against them. Friends noticed it immediately, how Huey Jr. seemed to lose himself in Palomo. He stopped making decisions for himself. He stopped thinking for himself. Everything was about her, what she wanted, what she needed. And Palomo? She thrived on it. The more control she had, the more powerful she felt. But their relationship wasn't just toxic. It was destructive. They argued constantly, often over money. Huey Jr.'s string of failed jobs had left them struggling financially, and Palomo was growing impatient. To an outsider, these were just normal disputes. But inside their world, it was something much more dangerous. Their fights weren't about money. They were about power, control, paranoia. And then something shifted. That's when Palomo introduced a new idea, one that would change everything. She told Huey Jr. that there were people out to get them, that they were being watched, betrayed, and she pointed to one family in particular. No one knows exactly how she convinced him, whether she fed him lies, played the victim, or twisted reality so deeply that he believed every word. But what we do know is this. Nathaniel Huey Jr. didn't just wake up one day and decide to kill a family. He was led there, by the woman he trusted most, by the woman who never pulled the trigger, but who might as well have. For months, Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo had been spiraling. Financial stress, paranoia, and their own toxic relationship had turned their world into a pressure cooker. But there was one trigger that pushed them over the edge: infidelity, or at least the belief that it had happened. What started as suspicion grew into a full-blown conspiracy, one that Palomo crafted with such precision, it became impossible for Huey Jr. to see the truth. And once she planted the idea, she never let it go. How Palomo found out about the affair. The details of the alleged affair are murky. There is no concrete proof that Zoraida Bartolome was ever involved with Nathaniel Huey Jr. No text messages, no recorded interactions, no documented connection. But to Ermalinda Palomo, facts didn't matter. She had already decided, and when she confronted Huey Jr. with her accusations, he didn't deny it. He didn't even argue, because she didn't give him a choice. Text messages recovered from Huey Jr.'s phone show a shift in their conversations. Before, they were mostly about money, work, or their relationship. But then, a new name started appearing. Bartolome. At first it was small. Palomo. I know she's watching us. Huey Jr. Who? Palomo. Zoraida. She's been trying to ruin you for months, and you're too blind to see it. He didn't believe it, not at first. But Palomo was relentless. She started showing him evidence. A conversation taken out of context. A glance exchanged at the wrong time. She twisted reality, rewriting the narrative in a way that only she controlled. And eventually Huey Jr. gave in. Once she had Huey Jr. convinced, she took it further. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was a conspiracy. Palomo told him that Bartolome wasn't just trying to steal him away. She was trying to destroy him. She fed him lie after lie, each one more elaborate than the last. She's been watching us, tracking us. She has connections with the police. She wants to take everything from you. And then, the final blow. She won't stop until we're dead. It was no longer just jealousy, it was survival. Or at least that's what Palomo made him believe. The suggestion was subtle, but the message was clear. Huey Jr. had to act, or they would be the ones in danger. This is where the manipulation becomes undeniable. Criminal psychologists often describe this as a gaslighting loop. A person is fed a false narrative so persistently that they begin to question their own reality. It starts small: doubt, confusion, the feeling that something isn't quite right. Then the introduction of fear. You're in danger, you just don't see it yet. And finally, isolation. I'm the only one who truly understands what's happening. You can't trust anyone else. By the time Palomo finished weaving her story, Huey Jr. was completely under her control. She had taken his paranoia and turned it into a weapon. She had taken his loyalty and turned it into a motive. And worst of all, she never once had to tell him to kill. She just led him there, step by step. On the night of the murders, Huey Jr. wasn't acting alone. His hands held the gun. But Palomo? She had already pulled the trigger. It was just after midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, families asleep, streetlights humming. Inside the home of Alberto Rolon and Zoraida Bartolome, everything seemed normal, until the moment it wasn't. No one heard the gunshots, or at least no one reported hearing them. The forensic timeline suggests that the attack happened quickly, ruthlessly. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. Nathaniel Huey Jr. either had a key or he was let in. Inside, the crime scene told its own story. Alberto Rolon was the first to die, shot point blank in the head as he slept. He never saw it coming. A silencer? Maybe. Or maybe Huey Jr. had simply mastered the art of killing in silence. Next was Zoraida Bartolome. She had been awake. Maybe she heard the first shot. Maybe she opened her eyes just in time to see the shadow in the doorway. She fought back. Scratches found on Huey Jr.'s arms suggest that she clawed at him, desperate to protect her children. But she never had a chance. One shot to the chest, another to the head. She collapsed inches from the bedroom door. A mother's final instinct, to run to her children, stopped cold. The children, Adriel and Diego, were found in their beds. No defensive wounds, no sign of struggle. They never woke up. One shot each. Small bodies. Heavy silence. And then, the dogs. Both executed. Why? To eliminate noise? To remove witnesses even though they couldn't speak? Or was it just cruelty? At 6:30 a.m., a neighbor called 911, not because of gunshots, not because of screams, but because something felt off. The house was quiet, too quiet. The family's cars were in the driveway, but no one had left for work or school. When police arrived, they knocked. No answer. They tried the door. Unlocked. The first officer inside later described the smell. Gunpowder, blood, something heavy in the air. Then the bodies. 4 victims, 2 children, 2 parents, and the dogs lying lifeless beside them. The officer's voice shook as he called it in. "We have a homicide, multiple victims. It's bad." At first, police thought it was a murder-suicide. The scene was too brutal, too final, but there was no weapon near the bodies, no signs that anyone in the home had done this to themselves. This was something else, something calculated. Someone had been here, and now they were gone. Where was Nathaniel Huey Jr. at that moment? Had he already fled? Was he sitting in his car, replaying what he had just done? Text messages sent in the hours after the murders give some insight. He didn't text Palomo right away. In fact, there was silence. A full 3 hours of nothing. Then a single message. "It's done." No details, no panic. Just those 2 words. Psychologists say this could mean one of 2 things. Either Huey Jr. was in complete shock, shutting down emotionally, or he felt nothing at all. We may never know what he was thinking, but one thing was clear. He wasn't planning to turn himself in. He was planning to run. Digital forensics pieced together what happened next. At 12:04 a.m., a motion-activated camera near the Roland Bartolome home captured a dark SUV pulling away. Huey Jr.'s vehicle. By 12:30 a.m., his phone pinged near his apartment. At 1 a.m., he turned it off. Vanished from digital tracking. But Palomo's phone? Still active. She wasn't with him yet. which means she had stayed behind. Was she tying up loose ends, erasing evidence, or was she making sure the scene was exactly as it needed to be? By sunrise, they were both gone, and a nationwide manhunt had just begun. When police discovered the bodies of Alberto Rolon, Zoraida Bartolome, and their two sons, Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo, were already gone. They had vanished before sunrise. By the time law enforcement identified Huey Jr. as a suspect, he and Palomo were nearly 500 miles away. This wasn't a random escape. This was planned, and they had a head start. Tracking them down meant reconstructing their movements, minute by minute, and it didn't take long. Their first mistake? They left a trail. 12:30 a.m., Huey Jr. returns to his apartment in Streamwood, Illinois. His phone shuts off. 5:45 a.m., Palomo's phone pings at a gas station in southern Illinois. Security cameras capture her walking back to the car. She looks calm, almost casual. No sign of distress, no urgency. Just a woman buying coffee. And in the parking lot, Huey Jr. sitting in the driver's seat. Engine running, he never gets out. The footage is chilling in its normalcy, as if nothing had happened. For the next 24 hours, they move carefully, sticking to back roads, paying in cash. But no matter how careful they were, they couldn't disappear completely. Every gas station camera, every highway toll booth, every motel lobby. They were always being recorded. They just didn't know it yet. By the time police publicly named them as suspects, Huey Jr. and Palomo had already crossed state lines, from Illinois into Missouri, and finally into Oklahoma. Why Oklahoma? No one knows. They had no family there, no connections, just an open road, and nowhere else to go. But the chase was closing in, because while they were running, the police were watching. September 20th, 2023, 9:30 p.m. A be on the lookout alert was issued for Huey Jr.'s vehicle, a dark-colored SUV. Less than 2 hours later, a patrol officer spotted it, driving erratically near Catoosa, Oklahoma. The officer didn't pull them over immediately. Instead, he followed, called for backup, and when the moment was right, the lights flashed, the siren wailed, and that's when everything went wrong. Huey Jr. slammed the gas. A high-speed chase began, reaching over 120 miles per hour. For nearly 10 minutes, he wove through traffic, pushing the SUV past its limit. But then, the first gunshot from inside the vehicle. Police later said they weren't sure who fired first, a self-inflicted shot, or had Palomo tried to stop him. Either way, seconds later, the SUV spun out of control, swerved off the highway, and crashed hard into a concrete barrier. The impact crushed the front of the vehicle. The engine burst into flames, and by the time officers reached the wreckage, Huey Jr. was slumped over the wheel. Palomo, motionless beside him. No movement, no response. It was over. Body cam footage shows the chaos of the aftermath. Officers rushing to the scene, guns drawn, expecting a fight. Instead, they found silence. Two bodies, a single firearm on the passenger seat, and one final mystery. Who died first? The medical examiner's report provided an answer. Huey Jr. had a gunshot wound to the head, likely self-inflicted. Palomo, on the other hand, no gunshot wound, just blunt force trauma from the crash. But the autopsy revealed something else. She was alive after the impact, barely, for a few seconds, maybe a minute. Long enough to see Huey Jr. take his final breath. Long enough to know they had lost. The chase was over. The story had ended. But for the families left behind, the nightmare was just beginning. 4 lives stolen, 2 suspects dead, no arrests, no trials, just a void, an emptiness that could never be filled. The crime was solved, but for the people left behind, the pain was just beginning. The town of Romeoville, Illinois, had always been quiet, safe, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where children played outside until the streetlights came on, where tragedy felt like something that happened somewhere else. But then, September 17th, 4 people found murdered in their own home, 2 of them children, And suddenly, everything changed. The news spread fast. Within hours, the crime scene was all over national headlines. Broadcasts flashed images of Alberto Rolon and Zoraida Bartolomé, smiling in family photos, holding their sons close. Adriel and Diego, so young, so full of life, now memorialized in school pictures. The sheer brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the community. People couldn't believe it, and in the days that followed, they mourned. At the candlelight vigil, hundreds gathered. Neighbors, teachers, friends. They stood in silence, some holding back tears, others clutching flowers, photos, handwritten letters. A woman whispered, "This isn't supposed to happen here." A man held his child close, shaking his head. They were good people. But the grief wasn't just local. Back in Puerto Rico, where Alberto and Zoraida's families still lived, news of their deaths sent an entire community into mourning. 4 caskets were flown back to the island, 4 headstones placed in the ground, and just like that, a family was gone. But as the grief set in, so did the questions. Was Huey Jr. just a pawn? In the official reports, Nathaniel Huey Jr. was the killer, the man who pulled the trigger, the one who left behind 4 bodies. But was he the mastermind? Or was he just a pawn? Investigators combed through messages, phone records, and social media interactions between Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo. The results? Disturbing. Palomo's influence over Huey Jr. ran deep, far deeper than most people realized. She controlled him, manipulated his emotions, fed into his paranoia. Every time he expressed doubt, she pushed him harder. Every time he hesitated, she made sure he stayed angry. And most chilling of all, she convinced him that killing was the only way out. Experts in criminal psychology call this coercive control. It's not just manipulation, it's a slow, deliberate breakdown of a person's ability to think for themselves. Was Huey Jr. already violent before Palomo entered his life? Or did she make him into a killer? We may never know. But one thing is certain. He wasn't acting alone. Could this have been prevented? Hindsight is cruel, because once a crime is committed, the red flags become so obvious. In this case, there were plenty of them. Law enforcement later admitted there were previous reports of violence involving Huey Jr. threats, domestic disputes, even guns. But no serious action was taken. Neighbors had complained about his erratic behavior, his explosive temper, his obsession with revenge. Still, no one stopped him. And Palomo, she knew exactly how to fuel his rage. She whispered in his ear, day after day, until she convinced him to do the unthinkable. Could police have intervened sooner? Could someone have stepped in before it was too late? Maybe. But the truth is, people like Palomo don't get caught until after the damage is done. Because on the surface, she was just an ordinary woman, a mother, a partner. But behind the scenes, she was pulling every string,